Section 21 of The Old Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. No less sorrowful, though less rageful, were the minds of the Princess Pamela and the Lady Philoclea, whose only advantages were that they had not consented to so much evil, and so were at greater peace with themselves, and that they were not left alone, but might mutually bear part of each other's woes. For when Philanax, not regarding Pamela's princely protestations, had by force left her under guard with her sister, and that the two sisters were matched as well in the disgraces of fortune as they had been in the best beauties of nature, those things that till then bashfulness and mistrust had made them hold reserve from one another, now fear, the underminer of all determinations, and necessity, the victorious rebel of all laws, forced them interchangeably to lay open. Their passions then so swelling in them as they would have made auditors of stones, rather than have swallowed up in silence the choking adventures were fallen unto them. Truly the hardest hearts which have at any time thought women's tears to be a matter of slight compassion, imagining that fair weather will quickly after follow, would have been mollified and been compelled to confess that the fairer a diamond is, the more pity it is it should receive a blemish. Although, no doubt, their faces did rather beautify sorrow, than sorrow could darken that which even in darkness did shine. But after they had, so long as their other afflictions would suffer them, with dolorous ceremonies bemoaned their father's death, they sat down together, apparelled as their misadventures had found them. Pamela in her journeying weeds, now converted to another use; Philoclea only in her nightgown, which she thought should be the raiment both of her marriage and funerals. But when the excellent creatures had, after much panting, with their inward travel, got so much breathing power as to make a pitiful discourse unto the other what had befallen them, and that the plain comparing the case they were in, they truly found that their griefs were not more like in regard of themselves than like in respect of the subject, the two princes, as Pamela had learned of Musidorus, being so minded as they would ever make both their fortunes one, it did more unite and so strengthen their lamentation, seeing the one could not any way be helped by the other, but rather the one could not be miserable, but that it must necessarily make the other miserable also. That therefore was the first matter their sweet mouths delivered, the declaring the passionate beginning, troublesome proceeding, and dangerous ending their never-ending loves had passed. And when at any time they entered into the praises of the young princes, too long it would have exercised their tongues, but that their memory forthwith warned them, the more praiseworthy they were, the more at that time they were worthy of lamentation. Then again to crying and wringing of hands, and then anew, as unquiet grief sought each corner, to new discourses, from discourses to wishes, from wishes to prayers, especially the tender Philoclea, who, as she was in years younger, and had never lifted up her mind to any opinion of sovereignty, so she was apter to yield to her misfortune, having no stronger debates in her mind than a man may say a most witty childhood is wont to nourish, as to imagine with herself why Philanax and the other noblemen should deal so cruelly by her that had never deserved evil of any of them, and how they could find in their hearts to imprison such a personage as she did figure Pyrocles, whom she thought all the world was bound to love as well as she did. But Pamela, although endued with a virtuous mildness, yet the knowledge of herself and what was due unto her made her heart full of stronger disdain against her adversity, so that she joined the vexation for her friend with the spite of herself, as she thought rebelliously detained, and mixed desirous thoughts to help with revengeful thoughts if she could not help. And as in pangs of death the stronger heart feels the greater torment, because it doth the more resist to a suppressor, so her mind, the nobler it was set, and had already embraced the higher thoughts, so much more it did repine. And the more it repined, the more helpless wounds it gave itself. But when great part of the night was passed over, the doleful music of the sweet lady's complaints, and the leisure, though with some strife, had brought Pamela to know that an eagle, when she is in a cage, must not think to do like an eagle, remembering with themselves that it was like the next day the lords would proceed against those they had imprisoned, they employed the rest of the night in writing unto them with such earnestness as the matter required, but in such styles as the state of their thoughts was apt to fashion. In the meantime, Pyrocles and Musidorus were recommended to so strong a guard as they might well see it was meant they should pay no less price than their lives for the getting out of that place, which they, like men indeed, fortifying courage with the true rampier of patience, did so endure as they did rather appear governors of necessity than servants to fortune, the whole sum of their thoughts resting upon the safety of their ladies, and their care one for the other, wherein, if at all, their hearts did seem to receive some softness. For sometimes Musidorus would feel such emotion to his friend and his unworthy case, that he would fall into such kind of speech. "My Pyrocles," would he say, "how unhappy may I think Thessalia, that hath been, as it were, the middle way to this evil state of yours, for if you had not been there brought up, the sea should not have had this power to sever you thus from your dear father. I have, therefore, if complaints do at any time become a man's heart, most cause to complain, since my country, which received the honour of Pyrocles' education, should be a step to his overthrow, if human chances can be counted an overthrow to him that stands upon virtue." "O excellent Musidorus," answered Pyrocles, "how do you teach me rather to fall out with myself and my fortune, since by you I have received all good, you only by me this affliction? To you and your virtuous mother I, in my tenderest years and father's greatest troubles, was sent for succour. There did I learn the sweet mysteries of philosophy. There had I your lively example to confirm that which I learned. There, lastly, had I your friendship, which no unhappiness can ever make me say but that hath made me happy. Now see how my destiny, the gods know, not my will, hath rewarded you. My father sends for you out of your land, whence but for me you had not come. What after followed you know. It was my love, not yours, which first stayed you here, and therefore, if the heavens ever held a just proportion, it were I, and not you, that should feel the smart." "O, blame not the heavens, sweet Pyrocles," said Musidorus, "as their course never alters, so is there nothing done by the uncharitable ruler of them but hath an everlasting reason for it. And, to say the truth of these things, we should deal ungratefully with nature if we should be forgetful receivers of her good gifts, and so diligent auditors of the chances we like not. We have lived, and have lived to be good to ourselves and others. Our souls, which are put into the stirring earth of our bodies, have achieved the causes of their hither coming. They have known and honoured with knowledge the cause of their creation. And for many men, for in this time, place, and fortune it is lawful for us to speak gloriously, it hath been behoveful that we should live. Since, then, eternity is not to be had in this conjunction, what is to be lost by the separation but time, which, since it hath his end, when that is once come, all that is past is nothing, and by the protracting nothing gotten but labour and care. Do not therefore that wrong to me, who something in years, but much in all other deserts am fitter to die than you, as to say you have brought me to any evil, since the love of you doth overbalance all bodily mischiefs, and those mischiefs be but mischiefs to the baser minds, too much delighted with the kennel of this life. Neither will I any more yield to my passion of lamenting you, which, howsoever it might agree to my exceeding friendship, surely it will nothing to your exceeding virtue. Add this to your noble speech, my dear cousin, said Pyrocles, that if we complain of this our fortune, or seem to ourselves faulty in having one hurt the other, we show a repentance of the love we bear to these matchless creatures, or at least a doubt it should be over dearly bought, which for my part, and so dare I answer for you, I call all the gods to witness, I am so far from that, No shame, no torment, no death could make me forego the least part of the inward honour, essential pleasure, and living life I have enjoyed in the presence of the faultless Philoclea. Take the preeminence in all things but in true loving, answered Musidorus, for the confession of that no death shall get of me. Of that, answered Pyrocles, soberly smiling, I perceive we shall have a debate in the other world, if at least there remain anything of remembrance in that place. I do not think the contrary, said Musidorus, although, you know, it is greatly held that with the death of body and senses, which are not only the beginning, but dwelling and nourishing of passions, thoughts, and imaginations, they failing, memory likewise fails, which riseth only out of them. And then is there left nothing but the intellectual part or intelligence, which, void of all mortal virtues, which stand in the mean of perturbations, doth only live in the contemplative virtue, and power of the omnipotent good, the soul of souls, and universal life of this great work, and therefore is utterly void from the possibility of drawing to itself these sensible considerations. Certainly, answered Pyrocles, I easily yield that we shall not know one another, and much less these past things, with a sensible or passionate knowledge, for the cause being taken away, the effect follows. Neither do I think we shall have such a memory as now we have, which is but a relic of the senses, or rather a print the senses have left of things past in our thoughts. But it shall be a vital power of that very intelligence, which, as while it was here, it held the chief seat of our life, and was, as it were, the last resort, to which of all our knowledges the highest appeal came, and so by that means was never ignorant of our actions, though many times rebelliously resisted, always with this prison darkened, so much more being free of that prison, and returning to the life of all things, where all infinite knowledge is, it cannot but be a right intelligence, which is both his name and being, of things both present and past, though void of imagining to itself anything, but even grown like to his Creator, hath all things with a spiritual knowledge before it, the difference of which is as hard for us to conceive as it hath been for us when we were in our mother's wombs, to comprehend, if anybody could have told us, what kind of light we now in this world see, what kind of knowledge we now have. Yet now we do not only feel our present being, but we conceive what we were before we were born, though remembrance make us not do it, but knowledge, and though we are utterly without any remorse of any misery we might then suffer. Even such and much more odds shall there be at that second delivery of us, when, void of sensible memory or memorative passion, we shall not see the colours, but lives of all things that have been or can be, and shall, as I hope, know our friendship, though exempt from the earthly care of friendship, having both united it and ourselves in that high and heavenly love of the unquenchable light. As he had ended his speech, Musidorus, looking with a heavenly joy upon him, sang this song unto him, he hath made before love turned his muse to another subject. Since nature's works be good, and death doth serve as nature's works, why should we fear to die? Since fear is vain but when it may preserve, why should we fear that which we cannot fly? Fear is more pain than is the pain it fears, disarming human minds of native might, while each conceit an ugly figure bears, which were not ill, well weighed in reason's light. Our owly eyes, which dimmed with passions be, and scarce discern the dawn of coming day, let them be cleared, and now begin to see our life is but a step in dusty way. Then let us hold the bliss of peaceful mind, since this we feel, great loss we cannot find. Thus did they, like quiet swans, sing their own obsequies, and virtuously enable their minds against all extremities which they did think would fall upon them, especially resolving that the first care they would have should be by taking the fault upon themselves to clear the two ladies, of whose case, as of nothing else that had happened, they had not any knowledge, although their friendly host, the honest gentleman Kirksinus, seeking all means how to help them, had endeavoured to speak with them, and to make them know who should be their judge. But the heedful servant of Philanax forbade him the entry upon pain of death, for so it was agreed upon that no man should have any conference with them for fear of new tumults, insomuch that Kirksinus was constrained to retire himself, having yet obtained thus much, that he would deliver unto the two princes their apparel and jewels, which, being left with him at Mantinea, wisely considering that the disguising weeds, which were all as then they had, saving a certain mean raiment Philanax had cast upon Pyrocles, would make them more odious in the sight of the judges, he had that night sent for, and now brought unto them. They accepted their own with great thankfulness, knowing from whence it came, and attired themselves in it against the next day, which being indeed rich and princely, they accordingly determined to maintain the names of Palladius and Timophorus, as before it was mentioned. Then gave they themselves to consider in what sort they might defend their causes, for they thought it no less vain to wish death than cowardly to fear it, till something before morning, a small slumber taking them, they were by and by after called up again to answer of no less than their lives imported. But in this sort was the judgment ordered. As soon as the morning had taken a full possession of the element, Evarchus called unto him Philanax, and willed him to draw out into the midst of the green, before the chief lodge, the throne of judgment seat, in which Basilius was wont to sit, and according to their customs was ever carried with their prince. For Evarchus did wisely consider the people to be naturally taken with exterior shows, far more than with inward consideration of the material points, and therefore in this new entry into so entangled a matter he would leave nothing which might be either an armour or ornament unto him, and in these pompous ceremonies he well knew a secret of government much to consist. That was performed by the diligent Philanax, and therein Evarchus did sit, himself all clothed in black, with the noblemen who could in that suddenness provide themselves of such mourning raiments. The whole people commanded to keep an ordinary silence of each side, which was duly observed of them, partly for the desire they had to see a good conclusion of the matters, and partly stricken with admiration as well at the grave and princely behaviour of Evarchus as at the greatness of the cause which was then to come in question. As for Philanax, Evarchus would have done him the honour to have him sit by him, but he excused himself, desiring to be the accuser of the prisoners in his master's behalf, and therefore, since he made himself a party, it was not convenient for him to sit in the judicial place. Then was it a while deliberated whether the two young ladies should be brought forth in open presence, but that was stopped by Philanax, whose love and faith did descend from his master to his children, and only desired the smart should light upon the others whom he thought guilty of his death and dishonour, alleging for this that neither wisdom would they should be brought in presence of the people, which might thereupon grow to new uproars, nor justice required they should be drawn to any shame till somebody accused them. And as for Pamela, he protested the laws of Arcadia would not allow any judgment of her, although she herself were to determine nothing till age or marriage enabled her. Then the Duke's body being laid upon a table just before Evarchus, and all covered over with black, the prisoners, namely the Duchess and two young princes, were sent forward to appear in the Protector's name, which name was the cause they came not to knowledge how near a kinsman was to judge of them, but thought him to be some nobleman chosen by the country in this extremity. So extraordinary a course had the order of the heavens produced at this time, that both nephew and son were not only prisoners, but unknown to their uncle and father, who of many years had not seen them, and Pyrocles was to plead for his life before that throne, in which throne lately before he had saved the Duke's life. But first was Gynecia led forth in the same weeds that the day and night before she had worn, saving, instead of Cleophilus' garment, in which she was found, she had cast on a long cloak which reached to the ground, of russet coarse cloth, with a poor felt hat which almost covered all her face. Most part of her goodly hair, on which her hands had laid many a spiteful hold, so lying upon her shoulders, as a man might see, had no artificial carelessness. Her eyes down on the ground, of purpose not to look on Pyrocles' face, which she did not so much shun for the unkindness she conceived of her own overthrow, as for the fear those motions in this short time of her life should be revived which she had with the passions of infinite sorrows mortified. Great was the compassion the people felt to see their princess' estate and beauty so deformed by fortune and her own desert, whom they had ever found a lady most worthy of all honours. But by and by the sight of the other two prisoners drew most of the eyes to that spectacle. Pyrocles came out led by Sympathus, clothed after the Greek manner, in a long coat of white velvet, reaching to the small of his leg, with great buttons of diamonds all along upon it. His neck, without any collar, not so much as hidden with a ruff, did pass the whiteness of his garments, which was not much in fashion unlike to the crimson raiment of knights of the order first put on. On his feet he had nothing but slippers, which after the ancient manner were tied up by certain laces, which were fastened under his knee, having wrapped about with many pretty laces his naked leg. His fair auburn hair, which he ware in great length, and gave at that time a delightful show, with being stirred up and down with the breath of a gentle wind, had nothing upon it but a white riband, in those days used for a diadem, which, rolled once or twice about the uppermost part of his forehead, fell down upon his back, closed up at each end with the richest pearl were to be seen in the world. After him followed another nobleman guiding the noble Musidorus, who had upon him a long cloak, after the fashion of that which we call the apostle's mantle, made of purple satin, not that purple which we now have, and is but a counterfeit of that gentian purple, which yet was far meaner in price and estimation, but of the right Tyrian purple, which was nearest to a colour betwixt our murrey and scarlet. On his head, which was black and curled, he ware a Persian tiara, all set down with rows of such rich rubies as they were enough to speak for him, that they had to judge of no mean personage. In this sort, with erected countenances, did these unfortunate princes suffer themselves to be led, showing aright by the comparison of them and Gynecia how to divers persons compassion is diversely to be ministered. For as to Gynecia, a lady known of great estate and greatly esteemed, the more miserable representation was made of her sudden ruin, the more men's hearts were forced to bewail such an evident witness of weak humanity. So to these men, not regarded because unknown, but rather, besides the detestation of their fact, hated as strangers, the more they should have fallen down in an abject semblant, the more, instead of passion, they should have gotten contempt, but therefore were to use, as I may term it, the more violence of magnanimity, and so to conquer the expectation of the lookers with an extraordinary virtue. And such effect indeed it wrought in the whole assembly, their eyes yet standing as it were in balance, to whether of them they should most direct their sight. Musidorus was in stature so much higher than Pyrocles, as commonly is gotten by 1 year's growth. His face, now beginning to have some tokens of a beard, was composed to a kind of manlike beauty. His colour was of a well-pleasing brownness, and the features of it such as they carried both delight and majesty. His countenance severe, and promising a mind much given to thinking. Pyrocles, of a pure complexion, and of such a cheerful favour as might seem either a woman's face on a boy, or an excellent boy's face in a woman. His look gentle and bashful, which bred the more admiration, having showed such notable proofs of courage. Lastly, though both had both, if there were any odds, Musidorus was the more goodly, and Pyrocles the more lovely. But as soon as Musidorus saw himself so far forth-led among the people that he knew to a great number of them his voice should be heard, misdoubting their intention to the Princess Pamela, of which he was more careful than of his own life, even as he went, though his leader sought to interrupt him, he thus, with a loud voice, spake unto them. "And is it possible, O Arcadians," said he, "that you can forget your natural duty you owe to your Princess Pamela? Hath this soil been so little beholding to her noble ancestors? Hath so long a time rooted no love in your hearts that live? Where is that faith to your prince's blood, which hath not only preserved you from all dangers heretofore, but hath spread your fame to all nations of the world? Where is that justice the Arcadians were wont to flourish in, whose nature is to render to every one his own? Will you now keep the right from the prince, who is the only giver of judgment, the key of justice and life of your laws? Do you hope in a few years to set up another race, which nothing but length of time can establish? Will you reward Basilius' children with ungratefulness, the very poison of manhood? Will you betray your long-settled reputation with the foul name of traitors? Is this your mourning for your dupe, to increase his loss with his daughter's misery? Imagine your prince to look out of the heavens unto you. What do you think he could wish for more at your hands than that you do well by his children? And what more honor, I pray you, can you do to his obsequies than to satisfy his soul with a loving memory, as you do to his body with an unfelt solemnity? What have you done with the Princess Pamela? Pamela, the just inheritrix of this country, Pam, whom this earth may be happy that it should be hereafter said she was born in Arcadia. Pamela, in herself your ornament, in her education your foster child, and every way your only princess. What account can you render to yourselves of her? Truly I do not think that you all know what is become of her. So soon may a diamond be lost, so soon may the fairest light in the world be put out. But look unto it, O Arcadians. Be not wilfully robbed of your greatest treasure. Make not yourselves ministers to private ambitions, who do but use yourselves to put on your own yokes. Whatsoever you determine of us, yet let not Basilius' daughters be strangers unto you. Lastly, howsoever you bar her from her public sovereignty, which if you do, little may we hope for equity when rebellion reigns, yet deny not that child's right unto her, that she may come and do the last duties to her father's body. Deny not that happiness, if in such a case there be any happiness, to your late duke, that his body may have his last touch of his dearest child. With such like broken manner of questions and speeches was Musidorus desirous, as much as in passing by them he could, to move the people to tender Pamela's fortune. But at length, by that they came to the judgment place, both Sympathus and his guider had greatly satisfied him with the assurance they gave him that this assembly of people had neither meaning nor power to do any hurt to the princess, whom they all acknowledged as their sovereign lady, but that the custom of Arcadia was such, till she had more years, the state of the country to be guided by a protector, under whom he and his fellow were to receive their judgment. That eased Musidorus' heart of his most vehement care, when he found his beloved lady to be out of danger. But Pyrocles, as soon as the Duchess of the one side, he and Musidorus of the other, were stayed before the face of their judge, having only for their bar the table on which the Duke's body lay, being nothing less vexed with the doubt of Philoclea than Musidorus was for Pamela, in this sort, with a lowly behaviour, and only then, like a suppliant, he spake to the protector. "Pardon me, most honoured judge," said he, "that uncommanded I begin my speech unto you, since both to you and me these words of mine shall be most necessary. To you, having the sacred exercise of justice in your hand, nothing appertains more properly than truth, nakedly and freely set down. To me, being environed about with dangerous calamities, what can be more convenient and comfortable than at least to be at peace within myself, in having discharged my conscience in a most behooveful verity? Understand, therefore, and truly understand, that the Lady Philoclea, to whose unstained virtue it hath been my unspeakable misery that my name should become a blot, if she be accused, is most unjustly accused of any dishonourable fact, which by my means she might be thought to have yielded unto. Whatsoever hath been done hath been by violence, which notwithstanding could not prevail against her chastity. But whatsoever hath been informed was my force, and I attest the heavens, to blaspheme which I am not now in fit time, that so much as my coming into her chamber was wholly unwitting unto her. This your wisdom may withal consider. If I would lie, I would lie for mine own behoof. I am not so old as to be weary of myself, but the very sting of my inward knowledge, joined with the consideration I must needs have what an infinite loss it should be to all these who love goodness in good folks, if so pure a child of virtue should wrongfully be destroyed, compels me to use my tongue against myself, and receive the burden of what evil was upon mine own doing. Look therefore with pitiful eyes upon so fair beams, and that misfortune which by me hath fallen unto her, help to repair it with your public judgment, since whosoever deals cruelly with such a creature shows himself a hater of mankind, and an envier of the world's bliss. And this petition I make even in the name of justice, that before you proceed against us, I may know how you conceive of her noble though unfortunate action, and what judgment you will make of it." He had not spoken the last word when all the people, both of great and low estate, confirmed with an united murmur Pyrocles' demand, longing, for the love generally was born Philoclea, to know what they might hope of her. Evarchus, though neither regarding a prisoner's passionate prayer, nor bearing over plausible ears to a many-headed motion, yet well enough content to win their liking with things in themselves indifferent, was content first to seek as much as might be of Philoclea's behaviour in this matter, which, being cleared by Pyrocles, and but weakly gainsaid by Philanax, who had framed both his own and Demetus' evidence most for her favour, yet finding by his wisdom that she was not altogether faultless, he pronounced that she should all her life long be kept prisoner among certain women of religion, like the Vestal nuns, so to repay the touched honour of her house with well observing a straight profession of chastity. Although this were a great prejudicing of Pyrocles' case, yet was he exceedingly joyous of it, being assured of his lady's life, and in the depth of his mind not sorry that what end soever he had, none should obtain the after enjoying that jewel whereon he had set his life's happiness. After it was by public sentence delivered what should be done with the sweet Philoclea, the laws of Arcadia bearing that what was appointed by magistrates in the knowledge of the prince could not afterward be repealed, Evarchus, still using to himself no other name but Protector of Arcadia, commanded those that had to say against the Duchess Gynecia to proceed, because both her state required she should be first heard, and also for that she was taken to be the principal in the greatest matter they were to judge of. Philanax incontinently stepped forth, and showing in his grieved eyes that he did thirst for her blood, began a well-thought-on discourse of her, in his judgment, execrable wickedness. But Gynecia, standing up before the judge, casting abroad her arms, with her eyes hidden under the breadth of her unseemly hat, laying open in all her gestures the despairful affliction to which all the might of her reason was converted, with such like words stopped Philanax as he was entering into his invective oration. "Stay, stay, Philanax," said she, "do not defile thy honest mouth with these dishonourable speeches thou art about to utter against a woman, now most wretched, lately thy mistress. Let either the remembrance how great she was move thy heart to some reverence, or seeing how low she is, stir in thee some pity. It may be truth doth make thee deal untruly, and love of justice frames injustice in thee. Do not therefore, neither shalt thou need, tread upon my desolate ruins. Thou shalt have what thou seekest, and yet shalt not be oppressor of her who cannot choose but love thee for thy singular love to thy master. I do not speak this to procure mercy, or to prolong my life. No, no, I say unto you, I will not live, but I am only loath my death should be engrieved with any wrong thou shouldst do unto me. I have been too painful a judge over myself to desire pardon in others' judgment. I have been too cruel an executioner over mine own soul to desire that execution of justice should be stayed for me. Alas, they that know how sorrow can rent the spirits, they that know what fiery hells are contained in a self-condemning mind, need not fear that fear can keep such a one from desiring to be separated from that which nothing but death can separate. I therefore say to thee, O just judge, that I, and only I, was the worker of Basilius' death. They were the hands that gave unto him that poisonous potion that hath brought death unto him, and loss to Arcadia. It was I, and none but I, that hastened his aged years to an unnatural end, and that have made all this people orphans of their royal father. I am the subject that have killed my prince. I am the wife that have murdered my husband. I am a degenerate woman, an undoer of this country, a shame of my children. What couldst thou have said more, O Philanax? And all this I grant. There resteth nothing else to say, but that I desire you will appoint quickly some to rid me of my life, rather than these hands, which else are destined unto it, and that indeed it may be done with such speed as I may not long die in this life which I have in so great horror. With that she crossed her arms and sat down upon the ground, attending in the judge's answer. But a great while it was before anybody could be heard speak, the whole people concurring in a lamentable cry. So much had Cynetia's words and behaviour stirred their hearts to a doleful compassion. Neither in truth could most of them, in their judgments, tell whether they should be more sorry for her fault or her misery, for the loss of her estate or loss of her virtue. But most were most moved with that which was under their eyes, the sense most subject to pity. But at length the reverent awe they stood in of Arcas brought them to a silent waiting his determination, who, having well considered the abomination of the fact, attending more the manifest proof of so horrible a trespass confessed by herself and proved by others, than anything relenting to those tragical phrases of her, apter to stir vulgar pity, than his mind, which hated evil in what colour soever he found it, having conferred a while with the principal men of the country, and demanded their allowance, he indefinitively gave his sentence, that whereas both in private and public respects this woman had most heinously offended, in private, because marriage being the most holy conjunction that falls to mankind, out of which all families and consequently all societies do proceed, which not only by community of goods, but community of children, as to knit the minds in a most perfect union, which whoso breaks dissolves all humanity, no man living from the danger of so near a neighbour, she had not only broken it, but broken it with death, and the most pretended death that might be. In public respect, that the prince's person, being in all monarchical governments the very knot of the people's welfare and light of all their doings, to which they are not only in conscience but in necessity bound to be loyal, she had traitorously poisoned him, neither regarding the country's profit, her own duty, nor the rigour of the laws, that therefore, as well for the due satisfaction to eternal justice and accomplishment of the Arcadian statutes, as for the everlasting examples of all wives and subjects, she should be presently conveyed to close prison, and there be kept with such food as might serve to sustain her alive until the day of her husband's burial, at which time she should be buried quick in the same tomb with him, so that his murder might be a murder to herself, and she forced to keep company with the body from which she had made so detestable a severance. And lastly, death might redress their disjoined conjunction of marriage. His judgment was received of the whole assembly as not with disliking, so with great astonishment, the greatness of the matter and person, as it were overpressing the might of their conceits. But when they did set it to the beam with the monstrousness of her ugly misdeed, they could not but yield in their hearts there was no overbalancing. As for Gynecia, who had already settled her thoughts not only to look but long for this event, having in this time of her vexation found a sweetness in the rest she hoped by death, with a countenance witnessing she had before passed through all the degrees of sorrows, that she had no new look to figure forth any more, raised up and offered forth her fair hands, to be bound or led as they would, being indeed troubled with no part of this judgment, but that her death was, as she thought, long delayed. They that were appointed for it conveyed her into the place she was in before, where the guard was relieved, and the number increased, to keep her more sure for the time of her execution. None of them all that led her, though most of them were such whose hearts had been long hardened with the often exercising such offices, being able to bar tears from their eyes, and other manifest tokens of compassionate sorrow, so goodly a virtue is a resolute constancy, that even in evil deservers it seems that party might have been notably well deserving. Thus the excellent Lady Gynecia, having passed 35 years of her age, even to admiration of her beautiful mind and body, and having not in her own knowledge ever spotted her soul with any wilful vice, but her inordinate love of Cleophila, was brought first by the violence of that ill-answered passion, and then by the despairing conceit she took of the judgment of God in her husband's death and her own fortune, purposely to overthrow herself, and confirm with a wrong confession that abominable shame which, with her wisdom joined to the truth, perhaps she might have repelled. End of section 21. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Thomas Copeland. Section 22 of The Old Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Then did Evarchus ask Philanax whether it were he that would charge the 2 young prisoners, or that some other should do it, and he sit, according to his estate, as an assistant in the judgment. Philanax told him, as before he had done, that he thought no man could lay manifest the naughtiness of those 2 young men with so much either truth or zeal as himself, and therefore he desired he might do this last service to his faithfully beloved master, as to prosecute the traitorous causers of his death and dishonour, which being done, he meant to give up all dealings in public affairs, since that man was gone who had made him love them. Philanax being thus ready to speak, the 2 princes were commanded to tell their names, who answered according to their agreement that they were Timophorus, Despota of Lycia, and Palladius, Prince of Caria. Which when they had said, they demanded to know by what authority they could judge of them, since they were not only foreigners, and so not born under their laws, but absolute princes, and therefore not to be touched by laws. But answer was presently made them, that Arcadia laws were to have their force upon any were found in Arcadia, since strangers have scope to know the custom of a country before they put themselves in it, and when they once are entered, they must know that what by many was made must not for one be broken, and so much less for a stranger, as he is to look for no privilege in that place, to which in time of need his service is not to be expected. As for their being princes, whether they were or no, the belief stood in their own words, which they had so diversely falsified as they did not deserve belief. But whatsoever they were, Arcadia was to acknowledge them but as private men, since they were by magistracy nor alliance to the princely blood to claim anything in that region. Therefore, if they had offended, which now by the plaintiff and their defence was to be judged, against the laws of nations they were to be chastised. If against the peculiar ordinances of the province, those peculiar ordinances were to lay hold of them. The princes stood a while upon that, demanding leisure to give perfect knowledge of their greatness. But when they were answered that in the case of a prince's death the law of that country had ever been that immediate trial should be had, they were forced to yield, resolved that in those names they would, as much as they could, cover the shame of their royal parentage, and keep, as long as might be, if evil were determined against them, the evil news from their careful kinsfolk, wherein the chief man they considered was Evarchus, whom the strange and secret working of justice had brought to be judge over them. In such shadow, or rather pit of darkness, the wormish mankind lives, that neither they know how to foresee nor what to fear, but are like tennis balls tossed by the racket of the higher powers. Thus, both sides ready, it was determined, because their cases were separate, first Philanax should be heard against Pyrocles, whom they termed Timophorus, and that heard, the other cause should follow, and so receive together such judgment as they should be found to have deserved. But Philanax, that was even short-breathed at the first, with the extreme vehemency he had to speak against them, stroking once or twice his forehead, and wiping his eyes, which either wept, or he would at that time have them seem to weep, looking first upon Pyrocles, as if he had proclaimed all hatefulness against him, humbly turning to Evarchus, who with quiet gravity showed great attention, he thus began his oration. That which all men, who take upon them to accuse another, are wont to desire, most worthy protector, to have many proofs of many faults in them they seek to have condemned, that is to me in this present action my greatest cumber and annoyance. For the number is so great, and the quality so monstrous, of the enormities this wretched young man hath committed, that neither I myself can tell where to begin, my thoughts being confused with the horrible multitude of them, neither do I think your virtuous ears will be able to endure the report of them, but will rather imagine you hear some tragedy invented of the extremity of wickedness, than a just recital of a wickedness indeed committed. For such is the disposition of the most sincere judgments, that as they can believe mean faults, and such as man's nature may easily slide into, so when they pass to a certain degree, nay, when they pass all degrees of unspeakable naughtiness, then find they in themselves a hardness to give credit that human creatures can so from all humanity be transformed. But in myself, the strength of my love to my dead master will help the weakness of my memory. In you, your excellent love of justice will force you to vouchsafe attention. And as for the matter, it is so manifest, so pitiful evidences lie before your eyes of it, that I shall need to be but a brief recounter, and no rhetorical enlarger of this most harmful mischief. I will therefore, in as few words as so huge a trespass can be contained, deliver unto you the sum of this miserable fact, leaving out a great number of particular tokens of his naughtiness, and only touching the essential points of this doleful case. This man, whom to begin withal I know not how to name, since, being come into this country unaccompanied like a lost pilgrim, from a man grew a woman, from a woman a ravisher of women, thence prisoner, and now a prince. But this Timophorus, this Cleophila, this what you will, for any shape or title he can take upon him that hath no restraint of shame, having understood the solitary life my late master lived, and considering how open he had laid himself to any traitorous attempt, for the first mask of his falsehood disguised himself like a woman, which, being the more simple and hurtless sex, might easier hide his subtle harmfulness, and presenting himself to my master, the most courteous prince that lived, was received of him with so great graciousness that might have bound not only a grateful mind, but might have mollified any enemy's rancour. But this venomous serpent, admitted into his bosom, as contagion will find a fit body for it, so had he quickly fallen into so near acquaintance with this naughty woman, whom even now you most justly condemned, that this was her right hand she saw with no eyes but his, nor seemed to have any life but in him. So glad was she to find one more cunning than herself in covering wickedness with a modest veil. What is to be thought passed between two such virtuous creatures, whereof the one hath confessed murder and the other rape, I leave to your wise consideration. For my heart hastens to the miserable point of Basilius' murder, for the executing whereof with more facility this young nymph of Diana's bringing up feigned certain rites she had to perform. So furious an impiety had carried him from all remembrance of goodness, that he did not only not fear the gods, as the beholders and punishers of so ungodly a villainy, but did blasphemously use their sacred holy name as a minister unto it. And, forsooth, a cave hereby was chosen for the temple of his devotions, a cave of such darkness as did prognosticate he went to please the infernal powers. For there this accursed caitiff upon the altar of falsehood sacrificed the life of the virtuous Basilius. By what means he trained him thither, alas, I know not, for if I might have known it, either my life had accompanied my master, or this fellow's death had preserved him. But this may suffice, that in the mouth of the cave, where this fellow had his lodging and chapel, when already Master Shepherd, his companion, had conveyed away the undoubted inheritrix of this country, was Gynecia found by the dead corpse of her husband, newly empoisoned, apparelled in the garments of the young lady, and ready, no question, to have fled to some place according to their comfort, but that she was by certain honest shepherds arrested, while in the meantime, because there should be left no revenger of this bloody mischief, this noble Amazon was violently gotten into the chamber of the Lady Philoclea, where, by the mingling of her shame with his misdeed, he might enforce her to be accessory to her father's death, and under the countenance of her and her sister, against whom they knew we would not rebel, seize, as it were, without gripe, into their treacherous hands the regiment of this mighty province. But the almighty eye prevented him of the end of his mischief by using a villain Demeter's hand to enclose him in there, where, with as much fortification as in a house could be made, he thought himself in most security. Thus see you, most just judge, a short and simple story of the infamous misery fallen to this country, indeed infamous, since by an effeminate man we should suffer a greater overthrow than our mightiest enemies have ever been able to lay upon us. And that all this which I have said is most manifest, as well of the murdering of Basilius as the ravishing of Philoclea, for those two parts I establish my accusation. Who is of so incredulous a mind, or rather who will so stop his eyes from seeing a thing clearer than the light, as not to hold for assured so palpable a matter? For to begin with his most cruel misdeed, it is to be imagined that Gynecia, a woman though wicked yet witty, would have attempted and achieved an enterprise no less hazardous than horrible, without having some counsellors in the beginning, and some comforter in the performing. Had she, who showed her thoughts were so overruled with some strange desire, as in despite of good nature and womanhood, to execute that in deeds, which in words we cannot hear without trembling? Had she, I say, no practice to lead her unto it? Or had she a practice without conspiracy? Or could she conspire without somebody to conspire with? And if one were, who so likely as this, to whom she communicated, I am sure, her mind, the world thinks her body? Neither let her words, taking the whole fault upon herself, be here in anything available. For to those persons who have vomited out of their souls all remnants of goodness, there rests a certain pride in evil, and having else no shadow of glory left them, they glory to be constant in iniquity, and that, God knows, be held out to the last gasp without revealing their accomplices, as thinking great courage is declared in being neither afraid of the gods nor ashamed of the world. But let Ganesh's action die with herself. What can all the earth answer for his coming hither? Why alone, if he be a prince? How so richly jewelled, if he be not a prince? Why then a woman? If now a man, why now Timophorus, if then Cleophila? Was all this play for nothing? Or if it had an end, what end but the end of my dear master? Shall we doubt so many secret conferences with Ganesha, such feigned favour to the over-soon beguiled Basilius? A cave made a lodging, and the same made a temple of his religion? Lastly, such changes and traverses as a quiet poet could scarce fill a poem with, all were directed to any less scope than to this monstrous murder? O snaky ambition, which can wind thyself into so many figures, to slide thither thou desirest to come! O corrupted reason of mankind, that can yield to deform thyself with so filthy desires! And full graceless be those minds whom so unnatural desires do not with their own ugliness sufficiently terrify. But yet, even of favour, let us grant him thus much more, as to fancy that in these foretold things Fortune might be a great actor, perchance to an evil end, yet to a less evil end all these entangled devices were intended. But I beseech your ladyship, my Lady Timophorus, tell me what excuse you can find for the changing your garments with the Duchess, that very instant she was to finish her execrable practice. How can you cloak the lending of your cloak unto her? Was all that but by chance too? Had the stars sent such an influence unto you, as you should be just weary of your lodging and garments, when your prince was destined to this slaughter? What say you to this, O shameful and shameless creature, fit indeed to be the dishonour of both sexes? But alas, alas, I spend too many words in so manifest and so miserable a matter. They must be 4 wild horses, which according to our laws are the executioners of men which murder our prince, which must decide this question with you. Yet see, so far had my zeal to my beloved prince transported me, that I had almost forgotten my second part, and the second abomination, I mean his violence offered, I hope, but offered, to the Lady Philoclea, wherewith, as it had well become his womanhood, he had come raving to the judgment seat. Indeed, our laws appoint not so cruel a death, although death too, for this fact as for the other. But whosoever well weighs it shall find it sprung out of the same fountain of mischievous naughtiness. The killing of the father, dishonouring the mother, and ravishing the child. Alas, could not so many benefits received of my prince, the justice of nature, the right of hospitality, be a bridle for thy lust, if not to thy cruelty? Or if thou hadst, as surely thou hast, a heart recompensing good with hatred, could not his death, which is the last of revenges, satisfy thy malice? But thou must heap upon it the shame of his daughter. Were thy eyes so stony, thy breast so tigerish, as the sweet and beautiful shows of Philoclea's virtue did not astonish thee? O woeful Arcadia, to whom the name of this mankind courtesan shall ever be remembered as a procurer of thy greatest loss! But too far I find my passion, yet an honest passion, hath guided me. The case is every way too much unmeasurable. It resteth in you, O excellent protector, to pronounce judgment, which, if there be hope that such a young man may prove profitable to the world, who in the first exercise of his own determinations, far past the arrantest strumpet in luxuriousness, the cunningest forger in falsehood, a player in disguising, a tiger in cruelty, a dragon in ungratefulness, let him be preserved like a jewel to do greater mischief. If his youth be not more defiled with treachery than the eldest man's age, let, I say, his youth be some cause of compassion. If he have not every way sought the overthrow of human society, if he have done anything like a prince, let his naming himself a prince breed a reverence to his base wickedness. If he have not broken all laws of hospitality, and broken them in the most detestable degree that can be, let his being a guest be a sacred protection of his more than savage doings. Or if his whorish beauty have not been as the highway of his wickedness, let the picture drawn upon so poisonous a wood be reserved to show how greatly colours can please us. But if it is, as it is, what should I say more? A very spirit of hellish naughtiness? If his act be to be punished, and his defiled person not to be pitied, then restore unto us our prince by duly punishing his murderers, for then shall we think him and his name to live, when we shall see his killers to die. Restore to the excellent Philoclea the honour by taking out of the world her dishonour. And think that at this day, in this matter, are the eyes of the world upon you, whether anything can sway your mind from a true administration of justice. Alas, though I have much more to say, I can say no more, for my tears and sighs interrupt my speech, and force me to give myself over to private sadness. Thus, while Philanax had uttered the uttermost of his malice, he made sorrow the cause of his conclusion. But while Philanax was in the course of his speech, and did with such bitter reproaches defame the princely Pyrocles, it was well to be seen his heart was unused to bear such injuries, and his thoughts such as could arm themselves better against anything than shame. For, sometimes blushing, his blood with divers motions coming and going, sometime closing his eyes and laying his hands over them, sometimes again giving such a look to Philanax as might show he assured himself he durst not so have spoken if they had been in indifferent place. With some impatience he bare the length of his oration, which being ended, with as much modest humbleness to the judge as despiteful scorn to the accuser, with words to this purpose he defended his honour. My accuser's tale may well bear witness with me, most rightful judge, in how hard a case, and environed with how many troubles, I may esteem myself. For if he who shows his tongue is not unacquainted with railing, was in an agony in the beginning of his speech with the multitude of his matters he had to lay unto me, wherein, notwithstanding, the most evil could fall unto him was that he should not do so much evil as he would. How cumbered do you think I may acknowledge myself, who in things no less importing than my life must be mine own advocate, without leisure to answer, or foreknowledge what should be objected, in things, I say, promoted with so cunning a confusion, as having mingled truths with falsehoods, surmises with certainties, causes of no moment with matters capital, scolding with complaining, I can absolutely neither grant nor deny. Neither can I tell whether I come hither to be judged, or before judgment to be punished, being compelled to bear such unworthy words, far more grievous than any death to me. But since the form of this government allows such tongue liberty unto him, I will pick as well as I can out of his invective those few points which may seem of some purpose in the touching of me, hoping that as by your easy hearing of me you will show that although you hate evil, yet you wish men may prove themselves not evil. So in that he hath said, you will not weigh so much what he hath said as what he hath proved, remembering that truth is simple and naked, and that if he had guided himself under that banner, he needed not out of the way have sought so vile and false disgracings of me, enough to have made the untruest accusation believed. I will therefore, using truth as my best eloquence, repeat unto you as much as I know in this matter, and then, by the only clearness of this discourse, your wisdom, I know, will find the difference betwixt cavilling supposition and direct declaration. This Prince Palladius and I, being inflamed with love, a passion far more easily reprehended than refrained, to the two pearls, daughters of Basilius, and understanding how he had secluded himself from the world, that like princes there was no access unto him, we disguised ourselves in such forms as might soonest bring us to the revealing of our affections. The Prince Palladius had such event of his doings that, with Pamela's consent, he was to convey her out of the thraldom she lived in, to receive the subjection of a greater people than her own, until her father's consent might be obtained. My fortune was more hard, for I bear no more love to the chaste Philoclea than Basilius, deceived in my sex, showed unto me, insomuch that by his importunacy I could have no time to assail the constant rock of the pure Philoclea's mind, till this policy I found: taking, under cover of some devotions, my lodging to draw Basilius thither, with hope to enjoy me, which likewise I revealed to the Duchess, that she might keep my place, and so make her husband see his error, while I, in the meantime, being delivered of them both, and having so locked the doors as I hoped the immaculate Philoclea should be succourless, my attempt was such as even now I confessed, and I made prisoner there, I know not by what means, when, being repelled by her divine virtue, I would fainest have escaped. Here have you the thread to guide you in labyrinth this man with his tongue had made so monstrous. Here see you the true discourse which he, mountebank fashion, doth make so wide a mouth over. Here you may conceive the reason why the Duchess had my garment, because by her going to the cave in the moonshine night she might be taken for me, which he useth as the knot of all his wise assertions, so that as this double-minded fellow's accusation was double, double likewise mine answer must needs be to the murder of Basilius, and violence to the inviolate Philoclea. For the first, O heavenly gods, who would have thought any mouth could have been found so immodest as to have opened so slight proofs of so horrible matters? This first argument is a question. Who would imagine that Gynecia would accomplish such an act without some accessories, and if any, who but I? Truly, I am so far from imagining anything, that till I saw these mourning tokens and heard Gynecia's confession, I never imagined the Duke was dead. And for my part, so vehemently, and more like the manner of passionate than guilty folks, I see the Duchess persecute herself, that I think condemnation may go too hastily over her, considering the unlikelihood, if not impossibility, her wisdom and virtue, so long nourished, should in one moment throw down itself to the uttermost end of wickedness. But whatsoever she hath done, which, as I say, I never believed, yet how unjustly should that aggravate my fault? She found abroad, I within doors. For as for the wearing of my garment, I have told the cause, She seeking, as you say, to escape, I locking myself in a house, without perchance the conspiracy of one poor stranger might enable her attempt, or the fortification of the lodge, as the trim man alleged, might make me hope to resist all Arcadia. And see how injuriously he seeks to draw from me my chiefest clearing, by preventing the credit of her words, wherewith she hath wholly taken the fault upon herself. An honest and unpartial examiner, her words may condemn her, but may not absolve me. Thus, void of all probable allegation, the craven crows upon my affliction, not leaving out any evil that ever he hath felt in his own soul, to charge my troubled youth withal. But who can look for a sweeter breath out of such a stomach, or for honey from so filthy a spider? What should I say more? If in so inhuman a matter, which he himself confesseth sincerest judgments are loathest to believe, and in the severest laws proofs clearer than the sun are required, his reasons are only the scum of a base malice, my answers most manifest shining in their own truth. If there remain any doubt of it, because it stands betwixt his affirming and my denial, I offer, nay, I desire, and humbly desire, I may be granted the trial by combat wherein let him be armed, and me be in my shirt. I doubt not justice will be my shield, and his heart will show itself as faint as it is false. Now come I to the second part of my offence towards the young lady, which I confess, and for her sake heartily lament. But, in fine, I offered force to her. Love offered more force to me. Let her beauty be compared to my years, and such effects will be made no miracles. But since it is thus as it is, and that justice teaches us not to love punishment, but to flee it for necessity, the salve of her honour, I mean as the world will take it, for else in truth it is most untouched, must be my marriage, and not my death. Since the one stops all mouths, the other becomes a doubtful fable. This matter requires no more words, and your experience, I hope, in these cases shall need no more. For myself, methinks I have showed already too much love of my life to bestow so many. But certainly it hath been love of truth, which could not bear so unworthy falsehood, and love of justice, that will brook no wrong to myself or other, and makes me now, even in that respect, to desire you to be moved rather with pity at a just cause of tears, than with the bloody tears this crocodile spends, who weeps to procure death, and not to lament death. It will be no honour to Basilius' tomb to have guiltless blood sprinkled upon it, and much more may a judge overweigh himself in cruelty than in clemency. It is hard, but it is excellent where it is found. A right knowledge when correction is necessary, when grace doth more avail. For mine own respect, if I thought in wisdom I had deserved death, I would not desire life, for I know nature will condemn me to die, though you do not. And longer I would not wish to draw this breath than I can keep myself unspotted of any horrible crime. Only I cannot nor ever will deny the love of Philoclea, whose violence wrought violent effects in me. With that he finished his speech, casting up his eyes to the judge, crossing his hands, which he held on their length before him, declaring a resolute patience in whatsoever should be done with him. End of section 22. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Thomas Copeland. Section 23 of The Old Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Philanax, like a watchful adversary, curiously marked all that he said, saving that in the beginning he was interrupted by 2 letters, where brought him the Princess Pamela and the Lady Philoclea, who, having all the night considered and bewailed their estate, careful of their mother likewise, of whom they would never think so much evil, But considering with themselves that she assuredly should have so due trial by the laws, as either should not need their help, or should be past their help, they looked to that which nearestly touched them, and each rate in this sort for him in whom their lives' joy consisted. The humble-hearted Philoclea rate much after this manner: My lords, what you will determine of me is to me uncertain, but what I have determined of myself I am most certain, which is no longer to enjoy my life than I may enjoy him for my husband, whom the gods for my highest glory have bestowed upon me. Those that judge him, let them execute me. Let my throat satisfy the hunger of murder. For, alas, what hath he done that had not his original in me? Look upon him, I beseech you, with indifferency, whether that face could hide a murder. Take leisure to know him, and then yourselves will say it hath been an inhumanity to suspect such excellency. Are the gods, think you, deceived in their workmanship? Artificers will not use marble, but to noble uses. Should those powers be so overshot as to frame so precious an image of their own, but to honourable purposes? O speak with him, O hear him, O know him, and become not the putters out of the world's light. Hope you to joy my father's soul with hurting him he loved above all the world? Shall a wrong suspicion make you forget the certain knowledge of those benefits this house hath received by him? Alas, alas! Let not Arcadia for his loss be accursed of the whole earth and of all posterity. He is a great prince. I speak unto you that which I know, for I have seen most evident testimonies. Why should you hinder my advancement, who, if I have passed my childhood hurdles to any of you, if I have refused nobody to do what good I could, if I have often mitigated my father's anger, ever sought to maintain his favour towards you, nay, if I have held you all as fathers and brothers unto me, rob me not of more than my life comes unto, tear not that which is unseparable to myself. But if he rest misliked of you, which, O God, how can it be? Yet give him to me, let me have him. You know I pretend no right to your state, therefore it is but a private petition I make unto you. Or, if you be hardly hearted, bent to a point otherwise, which sooner let me die than know, then to end as I began, let me by you be ordered to the same end, without for more cruelty you mean to force Philoclea to use her own hand to kill one of your duke's children. Pamela's letter, which she meant to send to the General Assembly of the Arcadian nobility, for so closely they were kept, as they were utterly ignorant of the new-taken orders, was thus framed: In such a state, my lords, you have placed me, as I can neither write nor be silent. For how can I be silent, since you have left me nothing but my solitary words to testify my misery? And how should I write? For as for speech, I have none but my jailor that can hear me, who neither can resolve what to write nor to whom to write. What to write is as hard for me to say as what I may not write. So little hope have I of any success, and so much hath no injury been left undone to mewards. To whom to write? Where may I learn? Since yet I wot not how to entitle you. Shall I call you my sovereigns? Set down your laws, that I may do homage. Shall I fall down lower, and name you my fellows? Show me, I beseech you, the lord and master over us. But shall Basilius' heir name herself your princess? Alas, I am your prisoner. But whatsoever I be, or whatsoever you be, all you beholders of these doleful lines, this do I signify unto you, and signify it with the heart that shall remain in that opinion. The good or evil you do the excellent prince was taken with me, and after by force from me, I will ever impute it as every way done to my own person. He is a prince, and worthy to be my husband, and so is he my husband, by me worthily chosen. Believe it, believe it. Either you shall be traitors for murdering of me, or if you let me live, the murderers of him shall smart as traitors. For what do you think I can think? Am I so childish as not to see wherein you touch him you do condemn me? Can his shame be without my reproach? No, nor shall be, since nothing he hath done that I will not avow. Is this the comfort you bring me in my father's death, to make me fuller of shame than sorrows? Need you do this, if it were not with full intention to prevent my power with slaughter? And so do, I pray you. It is high time for me to be weary of my life so long led, since you are weary of me before you have me. I say again, I say infinitely unto you, I will not live without him, if it be not to revenge him. Either do justly in saving both, or wise in killing both. If I be your prince, I command his preservation. If but a private person, then are we both to suffer. I take all truth to witness he hath done no fault but in going with me. Therefore, to conclude, in judging him you judge me. Neither conceive with yourselves the matter you treat of is the life of a stranger, though even in that name he deserved pity, nor of a shepherd, to which estate love of me made such a prince to descend, but determine most assuredly the life that is in question is of Pamela, Basilius' daughter. Many blots had the tears of these sweet ladies made in their letters, which many times they had altered, many times torn and written anew, ever thinking something either wanted or were too much, or would offend, or, which was worse, would breed denial. But at last the day warned them to dispatch, which they accordingly did, and calling one of their guard, for nobody else was suffered to come near them, and with great entreaty they requested him that he would present them to the principal noblemen and gentlemen together. For they had more confidence in the number's favour than in any one upon whom they would not lay the lives they held so precious. But the fellow trusty to Philanax, who had placed him there, delivered them both to him, what time Pyrocles began to speak, which he suddenly opened, and, seeing to what they tended by the first words, was so far from publishing them, whereby he feared in Evarchus' just mind either the princesses might be endangered, or the prisoners preserved, of which choice he knew not which to think the worst, that he would not himself read them over, doubting his own heart might be mollified, so bent upon revenge. Therefore, utterly suppressing them, he lent a spiteful ear to Pyrocles, and as soon as he had ended, with a very willing heart desired Evarchus he might accept the combat, although it would have framed but evil with him, Pyrocles never having found any match near him, besides Musidorus. But Evarchus made an answer, since bodily strength is but a servant to the mind, it were very barbarous and preposterous that force should be made judge over reason. Then would he also have replied in words unto him, but Evarchus, who knew what they could say was already said, taking their arguments into his mind, commanded him to proceed against the other prisoner, and that then he would sentence them both together. Philanax, nothing the milder for Pyrocles purging himself, but rather, according to the nature of arguing, especially when it is bitter, so much the more vehement, entered thus into his speech against Musidorus, being so overgone with rage that he forgat in his oration his precise method of oratory. Behold, most noble protector, to what estate Arcadia is come, since such men may challenge in combat the faithfulest of nobility, and having merited the shamefullest of all deaths, dare name in marriage the princesses of this country. Certainly, my masters, I must say you were much out of taste, if you had not rather enjoyed such ladies than be hanged. But the one you have as much deserved as you have dishonored the other. But now my speech must be directed to you, good Master Dorus, who with Pallas' help, pardie, are lately grown palladius. Too much this sacred seat of justice grants to such a fugitive bondslave, who instead of these examinations should be made confess with a whip that which a halter should punish. Are not you he, sir, whose sheep-hook was prepared to be our sceptre, in whom lay the knot of all this tragedy? Or else, perchance, they that should gain little by it were dealers in the murder. You only that had provided the fruits for yourself knew nothing of it, knew nothing. Hath thy companions here infected thee with such impudency as even in the face of all the world to deny what all the world perceiveth? The other pleads ignorance, and you, I doubt not, will allege absence. But he was ignorant when he was hard by, and you had framed your absence just against the time the act should be committed. So fit a lieutenant he knew he had left of his wickedness, that for himself his safest mean was to convey away the lady of us all, who, once out of the country, he knew we would come with olive branches of intercession unto her, and fall down at his feet to beseech him to leave keeping of sheep, and vouchsafe the tyrannizing over us. For to think that they are princes, as they say, although in our laws it behooves them nothing, I see at all no reason. These jewels, certainly, with their disguising sleights, they have pilfered in their vagabonding race. And think you such princes should be so long without some followers after them? Truly, if they be princes, it manifestly shows their virtues such as their subjects are glad to be rid of them. But be they as they are, for we are to consider the matter and not the men. Basilius' murder hath been the cause of their coming. Basilius' murder they have most treacherously brought to pass. Yet that I doubt not you will deny as well as your fellow. But how will you deny the stealing away the princess of this province, which is no less than treason? So notably has the justice of the gods provided for the punishing of these malefactors, as, if it were possible men would not believe the certain evidences of their principal mischief, yet have they discovered themselves sufficiently for their most just overthrow. I say, therefore, to omit my chief matter of the Duke's death, this wolvish shepherd, this counterfeit prince, hath traitorously, contrary to his allegiance, having made himself a servant and a subject, attempted the depriving this country of our natural princess, and therefore by all right must receive the punishment of traitors. This matter is so assured as he himself will not deny it, being taken and brought back in the fact. This matter is so odious in nature, so shameful to the world, so contrary to all laws, so hurtful to us, so false to him, as, if I should stand further in declaring or defacing it, I should either show great doubts in your wisdom or in your justice. Therefore I will transfer my care upon you, and attend to my learning and comfort the eternal example you will leave to all mankind of disguisers, falsifiers, adulterers, ravishers, murderers, and traitors. Musidorus, while Philanax was speaking against his cousin and him, had looked round about him to see whether by any means he might come to have caught him in his arms and have killed him. So much had his disgracing words filled his breast with rage. But perceiving himself so guarded as he should rather show a passionate act than perform his revenge, his hand, trembling with desire to strike, and all the veins in his face swelling, casting his eyes over the judgment seat, "O gods," said he, "and have you spared my life to bear these injuries of such a drivel? Is this the justice of this place, to have such men as we are submitted not only to apparent falsehood, but most shameful reviling? But mark, I pray you, the ungratefulness of the wretch, how utterly he hath forgotten the benefits both he and all his country have received of us. For if men ever may remember their own noble deeds, it is then when their just defence, and others' just unkindness, doth requite it. Were not we the men that killed the wild beasts, which otherwise had killed the princesses, if we had not succoured them? Consider, I pray you, if it please you, where had been Timophilus' rape or my treason, if the sweet beauties of the earth had then been devoured? Either think them now dead, or remember they live by us. And yet this telltale full often can acknowledge the loss they should have by their taking away, while maliciously he overpasseth who were their preservers. Neither let this be spoken by me as if I meant to balance this evil with that good, for I must confess that the saving such creatures was rewarded in the act itself, but only to manifest the partial jangling of this vile pick-thank. But if we be the traitors, where was your fidelity, O only tongue-valiant gentleman, when not only the young princesses, but the Duke himself was defended from uttermost peril, partly by me, but principally by this excellent young man's both wisdom and valor? Were we, that made ourselves against hundreds of armed men openly the shields of his life, like secretly to be his poisoners? Did we then show his life to be dearer to us than our own, because we might after rob him of his life, to die shamefully? Truly, truly, Master Orator, whosoever hath hired you to be so busy in their matters, who keep honester servants than yourself, he should have bid you in so many railings bring some excuse for himself, why, in the greatest need of your prince, to whom you pretend miraculous goodwill, you were not then as forward to do like a man yourself, or at least to accuse them that were slack in that service. But commonly they use their feet for their defense, whose tongue is their weapon. Certainly a very simple subtlety it had been for us to repose our lives in the daughters when we had killed the father. But as this gentleman thinks to win the reputation of a gallant speaker, by leaving nothing unsaid which a filthy mouth can imagine, so think I, or else all words are vain, that to wise men's judgment our clearness in the Duke's death is sufficiently notorious. But at length, when the merchant hath set out his gilded baggage, lastly he comes to some stuff of importance, and saith I conveyed away the princess of this country. And is she indeed your princess? I pray you then, whom should I wait of else, but her that was my mistress by my professed vow, and princess over me while I lived in this soil? Ask her why she went, ask not me why I served her, since, accounting me as a prince, you have naught to do with me. Taking me as her servant, then take withal that I must obey her. But you will say, I persuaded her to flee away. Certainly I will for no death deny it, knowing to what honor I should bring her from the thraldom by such fellows' counsel as you she lived in. Shall persuasion to a prince grow treason against a prince? It might be error in me, but falsehood it could not be, since I made myself partaker of whatsoever I wished her unto. Who will ever counsel his king, if his counsel be judged by the event? And if it be not found wise, shall it be thought to be wicked? But if I be a traitor, I hope you will grant me a correlative to whom I shall be a traitor. For the princess, against whom the treasons are considered, I am sure will avow my faithfulness, without that you will say I am a traitor to her because I left the country, and a traitor to the country because I went with her. Here do I leave out my just excuses of love's force, which, as the narrow heart hath never had noble room enough in it to receive so yet, to those manlike courages that by experience know how subject the virtuous minds are to love a most virtuous creature, witnessed to be such by the most excellent gifts of nature, will deem it a venial trespass to seek the satisfaction of honorable desires, honorable even in the curiousest points of honor, whereout there can no disgrace nor disparagement come unto her. Therefore, O judge, which I hope dost know what it is to be a judge, that your end is to preserve and not to destroy mankind, that laws are not made like lime twigs or nets to catch everything that toucheth them, but rather like sea marks to avoid the shipwrecks of ignorant passengers, since that our doing in the extremest interpretation is but a human error, and that of it you may make a profitable event, we being of such a state as their parents would not have misliked their affinity. You will not, I trust, at the persuasion of this brabbler, burn your house to make it clean, but like a wise father, turn even the fault of your children to any good that may come of it, since that is the fruit and end of all judgments. While this matter was thus handling, a silent and, as it were, astonished attention possessed all the people. A kindly compassion moved the noble gentleman's sympathus. But as for Kirksemus, everything was spoken either by or of his dear guests moved an effect in him, some tears, sometimes hopeful looks, sometimes whispering persuasions in their ears that stood by him, to seek the saving of the two young princes. But the general multitude waited the judgment of Evarchus, who, showing in his face no motions either at the one's or other's speech, letting pass the flowers of rhetoric, and only marking whether their reasons tended, having made the question to be asked of Ganesha, who continued to take the whole fault upon herself, and having caused Demetus with Miso and Mopsa, who by Philanax's order had been held in cruel prison, to make a full declaration how much they knew of these past matters, and then gathering as assured satisfaction to his own mind as in that case he could, not needing to take leisure for that whereof a long practice had bred a well-grounded habit in him, with a voice and gesture directed to the universal assembly, in this form pronounced sentence: This weighty matter whereof presently we are to determine, doth at the first consideration yield two important doubts. The first, whether these men be to be judged. The second, how they are to be judged. The first doubt ariseth because they give themselves out for princes absolute, a sacred name, and to which any violence seems an impiety. For how can any laws which are the bonds of all human society be observed if the lawgivers and law rulers be not held in an untouched admiration? But hereto, although already they have been sufficiently answered, yet thus much again I will repeat unto you, that whatsoever they be or be not, here they be no princes, since betwixt prince and subject there is as necessary a relation as between father and son, and as there is no man a father but to his child, so is not a prince but to his own subjects. Therefore is not this place to acknowledge in them any principality, without it should at the same time, by a secret consent, confess subjection. Yet hereto may be objected that the universal civility, the law of nations, all mankind being as it were co-inhabitors or world citizens together, hath ever required public persons should be of all parties especially regarded, since not only in peace but in wars, not only princes but heralds and trumpets are with great reasons exempted from injuries. This point is true, but yet so true as they that will receive the benefits of a custom must not be the first to break it, for then can they not complain if they be not helped by that which they themselves hurt? If a prince do acts of hostility without denouncing war, if he break his oath of amity, or innumerable such other things contrary to the law of arms, he must take heed how he falleth into their hands whom he so wrongeth, for then is courtesy the best custom he can claim. Much more these men, who have not only left to do like princes, but to be like princes, not only entered into Arcadia, and so into the Arcadian orders, but into domestical services, and so, by making themselves private, deprived themselves of respect due to their public calling. For no proportion it were injustice that a man might make himself no prince when he will do evil, and might anew create himself prince when he will not suffer evil. Thus, therefore, by all laws of nature and nations, and specially by their own putting themselves out of the sanctuary of them, these young men cannot in justice avoid the judgment, but like private men must have their doings either cleared, excused, or condemned. There resteth then the second point, how to judge well. And that must undoubtedly be done not by a free discourse of reason and skill of philosophy, but must be tied to the laws of Greece and municipal statutes of this kingdom. For although out of them these came, and to them must indeed refer their offspring, yet because philosophical discourses stand in the general consideration of things, they leave to every man a scope of his own interpretation, where the laws, applying themselves to the necessary use, fold us within the bounds assured, which once broken, man's nature infinitely rangeth. Judged, therefore, they must be, and by your laws judged. Now the action offereth itself to due balance betwixt the accusers' twofold accusation, and their answer accordingly applied, the questions being the one of a fact simply, the other of the quality of a fact. To the first they use direct denial, to the second qualification and excuse. They deny the murder of the Duke, and against mighty presumptions bring forth some probable answers, which they do principally fortify with the Duchess acknowledging herself only culpable. Certainly, as in equality of conjectures, we are not to take hold of the worst, but rather to be glad we may find any hope that mankind is not grown monstrous, being less evil undoubtedly a guilty man should escape than a guiltless perish. So, if in the rest they be spotless, then it is no further to be remembered. But if they have aggravated these suspicions with new evils, then are those suspicions so far to show themselves as to cause the other points to be thoroughly examined and with less favor weighed, since this no man can deny, they have been accidental, if not principal, causes of the Duke's death. Now then, we are to determine of the other matters which are laid to them, wherein they do not deny the fact, but deny or at least diminish the fault. But first I may remember, though it were not first alleged by them, the services they had done before, truly honorable and worthy of great reward, but not worthy to countervail with a following wickedness. Reward is proper to well-doing, punishment to evil-doing, which must not be confounded, no more than good and evil are to be mingled. Therefore it hath been determined in all wisdoms that no man, because he hath done well before, should have his present evil spared, but rather so much the more punished, as having showed he knew how to do good, would against his knowledge be naught. The fact then is nakedly, without passion or partiality, to be viewed, wherein he that terms himself to be Timophorus denies not he offered violence to the Lady Philoclea, an act punished by all the Grecian laws by being thrown down from a high tower to the earth, a death which doth no way exceed the proportion of the trespass. For nothing can be imagined more unnatural than by force to take that which, being holily used, is the root of humanity, the beginning and maintaining of living creatures, whereof the confusion must needs be of general ruin. And since the wickedness of lust is by our decrees punished by death, though both so consent, much more is he whose wickedness so overflows as he will compel another to be wicked. The other young man, he confesseth, he persuaded the Princess Pamela to flee her country, and accompanied her in it, without all question of ravishment, no less than the other. For although he ravished her not from herself, yet he ravished her from him that owed her, which was her father. This kind is chastised by the loss of the head, as a most execrable theft. For if they must die who steal from us our goods, how much more they who steal from us that for which we gather our goods? And if our laws have it so in the private persons, much more forcible are they to be in princes' children, where one steals, as it were, the whole state and well-being of that people, tied by the secret of a long use to be governed by none but the next of the blood. Neither let any man marvel our ancestors have been so severe in these cases, since the example of the Phoenician Europa, but especially the Grecian Helen hath taught them what destroying fires have grown of such sparkles. And although Helen was a wife, and this but a child, that booteth not, since the principal cause of marrying wives is that we may have children of our own. But let us see how these young men, truly for their persons worthy of pity, if they have pitied themselves, do go about to mitigate the vehemency of their errors. Some of their excuses are common to both, some peculiar only to him that was the shepherd. Both remembered the force of love, and as it were the mending up the matter by their marriage. If that unbridled desire which is entitled love might purge such a sickness as this, surely we should have many loving excuses of hateful mischiefs. Nay, rather, no mischief should be committed that should not be veiled under the name of love. For as well he that steals might allege the love of money, he that murders the love of revenge, he that rebels the love of greatness, as the adulterer the love of a woman. Since in all speech they do affirm they love that which an ill-governed passion makes them to follow. But love may have no such privilege. That sweet and heavenly uniting of the minds, which properly is called love, hath no other naught but virtue. And therefore, if it be a right love, it can never slide into any action that is not virtuous. The other, and indeed more effectual reason is, that they may be married unto them, and so honorably redress the dishonor of them, whom this matter seemeth more to touch. Surely, if the question were what were convenient for the parties, and not what is just in the never-changing justice, there might be much said in it. But herein we must consider that the laws look how to prevent by due examples that such things be not done. For if the governors of justice shall take such a scope as to measure the force of a law by the show of conveniency, and measure that conveniency not by the public society, but by that which is fittest for them to offend, young men, strong men, and rich men shall ever find private conveniences how to cover such committed disorders, as to the public shall not only be inconvenient, but pestilent. This marriage perchance might be fit for them, but very unfit for the state it were to allow a pattern of such procurations of marriage, and thus much do they both allege. Further goes he that went with the Princess Pamela, and requires the benefit of a counsellor, who hath place of free persuasion, and the reasonable excuse of a servant that did but wait of his mistress. Without all question, as counsellors have great cause to take heed how they advise anything directly opposite to the form of that present government, especially when they do it simply, without public allowance, so yet is this case much more apparent, since neither she was an effectual princess, her father being then alive, and, though he had been dead, she not come to the years of authority, nor he her servant in any manner to obey her, but by his own preferment, first belonging to Demetus, and then to the Duke. And therefore, if not by Arcadian laws, yet by household orders, bound to have done nothing without his agreement. Thus, therefore, since the deeds accomplished by these two are both abominable and inexcusable, I do, in the behalf of justice, and by the force of Arcadian laws, pronounce that Timophorus shall be thrown off from a high tower to receive his death by his fall. Palladius shall be beheaded, the time before the sun set, the place in Mantinia. The executioner Demetus, which office he shall execute all the days of his life, for his beastly forgetting the careful duty owed to his charge. This said, he turned himself to Philanax and 2 other of the noblemen, commanding them to see the judgment presently performed. Philanax, more greedy than any hunter of his prey, went straight to lay hold of the excellent prisoners, who, casting a farewell look one upon the other, represented in their faces as much unappalled constancy as the most excellent courage can deliver in outward graces. Yet, if at all there were any show of change in them, it was that Pyrocles was something nearer to bashfulness, and Musidorus to anger, both overruled by reason and resolution. But as with great number of armed men Philanax was descending unto them, and that Musidorus was beginning to say something in Pyrocles' behalf, behold, Kirksemus, that with arms cast abroad and open mouth came crying to Evarchus, holding a stranger in his hand that cried much more than he, desiring they might be heard speak before the prisoners were removed. Even the noble gentleman Sympathus aided them in it, and taking such as he could command, stopped Philanax betwixt entreaty and force from carrying away the princes, until it were heard what new matters those men did bring. So again mounting to the tribunal, they hearkened to the stranger's vehement speech, or rather a passionate exclaiming. But first you will be content to know what he was, and what cause and mean brought him thither. It is not forgotten, I hope, how in the first beginning of Musidorus' love, when, in despite of his best grounded determinations, he became a slave to affection, how, leaving the place of his eye infection, he met with the shepherd Menalcas, by the help of whose raiment he advanced himself to the estate which he accounted most high in his mind, and how, at least by his presence, his purpose might be revealed, he hired him to go into Thessalia, writing by him to a trusty servant of his that he should arrest him until he knew his further pleasure. Menalcas faithfully performed his errand, and was as faithfully imprisoned by Kalodulus, for such was the gentleman's name to whom Musidorus directed him. But as Kalodulus performed the first part of his duty in doing the commandment of his prince, so was he, with abundance of sincere loyalty, extremely perplexed when he understood of Menalcas the strange disguising of his beloved master. For as the acts he and his cousin Pyrocles had done in Asia and Egypt had filled all the ears of the Thessalians and Macedonians with no less joy than admiration, so was the fear of their loss no less grievous unto them, when by the noise of report they understood of their lonely committing themselves to the sea, the issue of which they had no way learned. But now that by Menalcas he, perceiving where he was, guessing the like of Pyrocles, comparing the unusedness of this act with the unripeness of their age, seeing in general conjecture they could do it for nothing that might not fall out dangerous, he was somewhile troubled with himself what to do betwixt doubt of their hurt and doubt of their displeasure. Lastly, he resolved his safest and honestest way was to reveal it to the king Evarchus, that both his authority might prevent any damage, and under his wings he himself might remain safe. Thitherward therefore he went. But being come to the city of Pella, where he had heard the king lay, he found him not long before parted toward Arcadia. This made him with all the speed he could follow Evarchus, as well to advertise him, if need were, as to do his prince service in his uncle's thither coming. And so it happened, that being even this day come to Mantinia, and as warily as he could inquiring after Evarchus, he straight received a strange rumour of these things, but so uncertainly as popular reports carry so rare accidents. But this by all men he was willed to seek out Kirksemus, a great gentleman of that country, who would soonest satisfy him of all these occurrents. Thus instructed, he came about the midst of Evarchus' judgment to the desert, where, seeing great multitudes, and hearing unknown names of Palladius and Timophorus, and not able to press to the place where Evarchus sat, he inquired of Kirksemus, and was soon brought unto him, partly because he was generally known unto all men, and partly because he had withdrawn himself from the press, when he perceived by Evarchus' words whither they tended, not being able to endure his guest's condemnation. He inquired forthwith of Kirksemus the cause of the assembly, and whether he had heard of Evarchus, who with many tears made a doleful recital unto him both of the Amazon and shepherd, setting forth their natural graces and lamenting their pitiful undoing. But his description made Kalodulus immediately know the shepherd was his duke, and so judging the other to be Pyrocles, and speedily communicating it to Kirksemus, who he saw did favour their case, they brake the press with astonishing every man with their cries. And being come to Evarchus, Colodulus fell at his feet, telling him those he had judged were his own son and nephew, the one the comfort of Macedon, the other the stay of Thessalia, with many such like words, but as from a man that assured himself in that matter he should need small speech, while Cirxenus made it known to all men what the prisoners were, to whom he cried they should salute their father, and joy in the good hap the gods had sent them, who were no less glad than all the people amazed at the strange event of these matters. Even Philanax's revengeful heart was mollified when he saw how from divers parts of the world so near kinsmen should meet in such a necessity. And withal the fame of Pyrocles and Musidorus greatly drew him to a compassionate conceit, and had already unclothed his face of all show of malice. But Evarchus stayed a good while upon himself, like a valiant man that should receive a notable encounter, being vehemently stricken with the fatherly love of so excellent children, and studying with his best reason what his office required. At length, with such a kind of gravity as was near to sorrow, he thus uttered his mind. I take witness of the immortal gods, said he, O Arcadians, that what this day I have said hath been out of my assured persuasion what justice itself and your just laws require. Though strangers then to me, I had no desire to hurt them, but leaving aside all considerations of the parties, I weighed the matter which you committed into my hands with my most unpartial and furthest reach of reason, and thereout have condemned them to lose their lives, contaminated with so many foul breaches of hospitality, civility, and virtue. Now, contrary to all expectation, I find them to be my only son and nephew, such upon whom you see what gifts nature hath bestowed, such who have to the wonder of the world so behaved themselves as might give just cause to the greatest hopes that in an excellent youth may be conceived. Lastly, in few words, such in whom I placed all my mortal joys, and thought myself now near my grave to recover a new life. But alas, shall justice halt, or shall she wink in one's cause, which had lynx's eyes in another? Or rather shall all private respects give place to that holy name? Be it so. Be it so, let my grey hairs be laid in the dust with sorrow. Let the small remnant of my life be to me an inward and outward desolation, and to the world a gazing stock of wretched misery. But never, never let sacred rightfulness fall. It is immortal, and immortal ought to be preserved. If rightly I have judged, then rightly I have judged mine own children, unless the name of a child should have force to change the never-changing justice. No, no, Pyrocles and Musidorus, I prefer you much before mine own life, but I prefer justice as far before you. When you did like yourselves, my body should willingly have been your shield, but I cannot keep you from the effects of your own doing. Nay, I cannot in this case acknowledge you for mine, for never had I shepherd to my nephew, nor never had woman to my son. Your vices have degraded you from being princes, and have disannulled your birthright. Therefore, if there be anything left in you of princely virtue, show it in constant suffering that your unprincely dealing hath purchased unto you. For my part, I must tell you, you have forced a father to rob himself of his children. Do you, therefore, O Philanax, and you, my other lords of this country, see the judgment be rightly performed, in time, place, and manner before appointed. With that, though he would have refrained them, a man might perceive the tears drop down his long white beard, which moved not only Colodulus and Cirxenus to roaring lamentations, but all the assembly dolefully to record that pitiful spectacle. Philanax himself could not abstain from great shows of pitying sorrow, and manifest withdrawing from performing the king's commandment. But Musidorus, having the hope of his safety and recovering the Princess Pamela, which made him most desire to live, so suddenly dashed, but especially moved for his dear Pyrocles, for which he was ever resolved his last speech should be, and stirred up with the rage of unkindness, he thus spake: "Enjoy thy bloody conquest, tyrannical Evarchus," said he, "for neither is convenient the title of a king to a murderer, nor the remembrance of kindred to a destroyer of his kindred. Go home, and glory that it hath been in thy power shamefully to kill Musidorus. Let thy flattering orators dedicate crowns of laurel unto thee, that the first of thy race thou hast overthrown a prince of Thessalia. But for me, I hope the Thessalians are not so degenerate from their ancestors, but that they will revenge my injury and their loss upon thee. I hope my death is no more unjust to me than it shall be bitter unto thee. Howsoever it be, my death shall triumph over thy cruelty. Neither as now would I live to make my life beholding unto thee. But if thy cruelty hath not so blinded thine eyes that thou canst not see thine own hurt, if thine heart be not so devilish as thou hast no power but to torment thyself, then look upon this young Pyrocles with a manlike eye, if not with a pitiful. Give not occasion to the whole earth to say, See how the gods have made the tyrant tear his own bowels. Examine the eyes and voices of all this people, and what all men see. Be not blind in thine own case. Look, I say, look upon him in whom the most curious searcher is able to find no fault but that he is thy son. Believe it, thy own subjects will detest thee for robbing them of such a prince, in whom they have right as well as thyself." Some more words to that purpose he would have spoken, but Pyrocles, who had oft called to him, did now fully interrupt him, desiring him not to do him the wrong to give his father ill words before him, willing him to consider it was their own fault and not his injustice, and withal to remember their resolution of well suffering all accidents which this impatience did vary from. And then, kneeling down, with all humbleness he took the speech in this order to Evarchus: "If my daily prayers to the gods almighty had so far prevailed as to have granted me the end whereto I have directed my actions, I should rather have been now a comfort to your mind than an example of your justice, rather a preserver of your memory by my life than a monument of your judgment by my death. But since it hath pleased their unsearchable wisdoms to overthrow all the desires I had to serve you, and make me become a shame unto you, since the last obedience I can show you is to die, vouchsafe yet, O Father, if my fault have not made me altogether so to term you, vouchsafe, I say, to let the few last words your son shall ever speak not be tedious unto you. And if the remembrance of my virtuous mother, who once was dear unto you, may bear any sway with you, if the name of Pyrocles have at any time been pleasant, let one request of mine, which shall not be for mine own life, be graciously accepted of you. What you owe to justice is performed in my death. A father to have executed his only son will leave a sufficient example for a greater crime than this. My blood will satisfy the highest point of equity. My blood will satisfy the hardest hearts of this country. Oh, save the life of this prince. That is the only all I will with my last breath demand of you. With what face will you look upon your sister, when in reward of nourishing me in your greatest need, you take away, and in such sort you take away, that which is more dear to her than all the world, and is the only comfort wherewith she nourisheth her old age? O give not such an occasion to the noble Thessalians for ever to curse the match that their prince did make with the Macedonians' blood. By my loss there follows no public loss, for you are to hold the seat, and to provide yourself perchance a worthy successor. But how can you, or all the earth recompense the damage that poor Thessalia shall sustain, who, sending out, whom otherwise they would no more have spared than their own eyes, their prince to you, and you requesting to have him by you, he should thus dishonorably be distinguished. Set before you, I beseech you, the face of that miserable people, when no sooner shall the news come that you have met your nephew, but withal they shall hear that you have beheaded him. How many tears they shall spend, how many complaints they shall make, so many just execrations will light upon you. And take heed, O Father, for since my death answers my fault, while I live I will call upon that dear name, lest seeking too precise a course of justice, you be not thought most unjust in weakening your neighbor's mighty estate by taking away their only pillar. In me this matter began. In me let it receive its ending. Assure yourself, no man will doubt your severe observing of the laws, when it shall be known Evarchus hath killed Pyrocles. But the time of my ever farewell approacheth, if you do not think my death sufficient for my fault, and do not desire to make my death more miserable than death, let these dying words of him that was once your son pierce your ears. Let Musidorus live, and Pyrocles shall live in him, and you shall not want a child. A child, cried out Musidorus, to him that kills Pyrocles? With that again he fell to entreat for Pyrocles, and Pyrocles fast again for Musidorus, each employing his wit how to show himself most worthy to die, to such an admiration of all the beholders, that most of them, examining the matter by their own passions, thought Evarchus, as often extraordinary excellences, not being rightly conceived, do rather offend than please, an obstinate-hearted man, and such a one, who, being pitiless, his dominion must needs be insupportable. But Evarchus, that felt his own misery more than they, and yet loved goodness more than himself, with such a sad assured behaviour as Cato killed himself withal, when he had heard the uttermost of that their speech tended unto, he commanded again they should be carried away, rising up from the seat, which he would much rather have wished should have been his grave, and looking who would take his charge, whereto every one was exceeding backward. But as this pitiful matter was entering into, those that were next to the Duke's body might hear from under the velvet wherewith he was covered a great voice of groaning, whereat every man astonished, and their spirits appalled with these former miseries, apt to take any strange conceit, when they might perfectly perceive the body stir, then some began to fear spirits, some to look for a miracle, most to imagine they knew not what. But Philanax and Kirximus, whose eyes honest love, though to divers parties held most attentive, leapt to the table, and putting off the velvet cover, might plainly discern with as much wonder as gladness that the Duke lived, which how it fell out shall in few words be declared. So it was that the drink he had received was neither, as Ganesha first imagined, a love potion, nor, as it was after thought, a deadly poison, but a drink made by notable art, and, as it was thought, not without natural magic, to procure for 30 hours such a deadly sleep as should oppress all show of life. The cause of the making of this drink had first been that a princess of Cyprus, grandmother to Ganesha, being notably learned, and yet not able with all her learning to answer the objections of Cupid, did furiously love a young nobleman of her father's court, who, fearing the king's rage, and not once daring either to attempt or accept so high a place, she made that sleeping drink, and found means by a trusty servant of hers, who of purpose invited him to his chamber, to procure him that suspected not such thing to receive it. Which done, he, no way able to resist, was secretly carried by him into a pleasant chamber in the midst of a garden she had of purpose provided for this enterprise, where that space of time pleasing herself with seeing and cherishing of him, when the time came of the drink's end of working, and he most astonished than if he had fallen from the clouds, she bade him choose either then to marry her, and to promise to flee away with her in a bark she had made ready, or else she would presently cry out and show in what place he was, with oath he was come thither to ravish her. The nobleman in these straits her beauty prevailed. He married her, and escaped the realm with her, and after many strange adventures were reconciled to the king her father. But she, gratefully remembering the service the drink had done her, preserved in a bottle, made by singular art, longed to keep it without perishing, great quantity of it with the foretold inscription, which, wrong interpreted by her daughter-in-law, the Queen of Cyprus, was given by her to Gynecia at the time of her marriage, and the drink, finding an old body of Basilius, had kept him some hours longer in a trance than it would have done a younger. But a good while it was before good Basilius could come again to himself. In which time Evarchus, more glad than of the whole world's monarchy to be rid of his miserable magistracy, which even in justice he was now to surrender to the lawful prince of that country, came from the throne unto him, and there with much ado made him understand how these intricate matters had fallen out. Many garboils passed through his fancy before he could be persuaded Cleophila was other than a woman. At length, remembering the oracle, which now indeed was accomplished, not as before he had imagined, considering all had fallen out by the highest providence, and withal weighing in all these matters his own fault had been the greatest, the first thing he did was with all honourable pomp to send for Gynecia, who, poor lady, thought she was leading forth to her living burial, and when she came, to recount before all the people the excellent virtue was in her, which she had not only maintained all her life most unspotted, but now was content so miserably to die to follow her husband, he told them how she had warned him to take heed of that drink, and so with all the exaltings of her that might be, he publicly desired her pardon for those errors he had committed, and so kissing her, left her to receive the most honourable fame of any princess throughout the world, all men thinking, saving only Pyrocles and Philoclea, who never bewrayed her, that she was the perfect mirror of all wifely love, which, though in that point undeserved, she did in the remnant of her life duly purchase, with observing all duty and faith to the example and glory of Greece. So uncertain are mortal judgments, the same person, most infamous and most famous, and neither justly. Then, with princely entertainment to Evarchus, and many kind words to Pyrocles, whom still he dearly loved, though in a more virtuous kind, the marriage was concluded, to the inestimable joy of Evarchus, towards whom now Musidorus acknowledged his fault, betwixt those pearls, princes and princesses. Philanax, for his singular faith, ever held dear of Basilius while he lived, and no less of Musidorus, who was to inherit the dukedom, and therein confirmed to him and his the second place of that province, with great increase of his living to maintain it, which like proportion he used to Colodulus in Thessalia. Sympathus Evarchus took with him into Macedon, and there highly advanced him. But as for Circinus, Pyrocles, to whom his father in his own time gave the kingdom of Thrace, held him always about him, giving him in pure gift the great city of Abdera. But the solemnities of the marriages, with the Arcadian pastorals full of many comical adventures happening to those rural lovers, the strange story of the fair Queen Artaxia of Persia and Erona of Lydia, with the Prince Plangus' wonderful chances, whom the latter did send to Pyrocles, and the extreme affection Amasis, king of Egypt, bare unto the former, the shepherdish loves of Menalcas with Calodas' daughter, and the poor hopes of Felicities in the pursuit of his affections, the strange countenance of Caius and Strephon's desire, lastly, the son of Pyrocles, and Melidura, the fair daughter of Pamela, by Musidorus, who even at their birth entered into admirable fortunes, may awake some other spirit to exercise his pen in that wherewith mine is already dulled. Here endeth the fifth and last book or act of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. End of section 23. End of the Old Arcadia, by Sir Philip Sidney. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Thomas Copeland.